Hey friends, welcome to episode 541 of the My 123 Cents podcast. It is WrestleMania season, so I brought on my resident WrestleMania expert, Chad Smart, for this week's episode and several weeks we have planned out. Chad, it's been a while, and I know you've been on the road several times, but actually you had a big wrestling event just a few weeks ago with AEW Revolution. We haven't really talked about that event here publicly, so what did you experience going to Revolution, and how does it compare to I don't want to necessarily compare it to WrestleMania, but to a WWE live event?
No, it was a good show. I mean, this was my third AEW pay-per-view, I believe, third or fourth. And, I've never had a bad show so far. And it's been good. It's fun. It's definitely different than a WWE crowd, although, I mean, there were some champs there, I will say. I had a champion sitting next to me. I wish I would have, if I would have taken my contract for a title at any time, not my Money in the Bank briefcase, because different promotions, but I could have cashed in. But no, I mean, the energy is different. And I'm trying to think of what the last WWE pay-per-view that I went to was. And I'm trying to think if I've been to one since Money in the Bank 2017.
WrestleMania 39.
No, I mean, besides WrestleMania.
Oh.
I'm trying to not compare it to WrestleMania.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But it was it was a bigger crowd than I really expected when they booked, because when AEW has been in LA previously, they've booked the Forum, which is a smaller venue. And this time they picked the former Staples Center, now called the Crypto.com Arena. I like to call it the Crypt because it just sounds dumb. But I believe when tickets went on sale, they weren't selling the upper deck in the 300 level, which didn't really surprise me. And why I was surprised that they went with the Crypt, because I felt it was too big for an AEW show at the moment. But it was pretty packed, and a lot of the upper deck was filled in. It wasn't tarped off, it wasn't blocked off, whatever. But it was really good. I said, the first AEW show I went to, which was Full Gear 2023, I got to see Hangman Page drink Swerve Strickland's blood, and Swerve Hangman with the chain on the ring post. All in 2024, I got to see Darby Allin set Jack Perry on fire with a flamethrower. So I was expecting something a little big, and really but out of Revolution, the only major thing that happened was Toni Storm and Mariah May bleeding buckets, and Mariah or Toni taping her fist and then putting them into a bucket of glass. Kind of like they didn't go as bad as Ian and Axel Rotten did back in ECW, thankfully, but it's still a little bit more extreme than what you're seeing in WWE's women matches these days.
Well, let me ask you about that, because it's gotten a lot of criticism online. I'm not into it, whether it's WWE, AEW, Indies, TNA. That's just not my jam. And I have friends that are, deathmatch wrestlers and do all that stuff. To me, it's not, it's not worth it. But what did you think seeing that? Because that is a pretty extreme for, and I hate making that differentiation of women's and men's wrestling, but really that was probably the most brutal women's match that we've seen from a mainstream company.
Mainstream.
What do you think? Being there?
Well, I think this feud is a blood feud. And so I didn't mind the bleeding. I was surprised at how much blood there was, especially from Toni Storm.
Yeah.
So it didn't bother. Again, it wasn't like they were taking the shards of glass and trying to cut each other open.
Yeah.
Like Ian and Axel did.
Right.
So it didn't bother me. I do think you had that match with blood, and then the next match, or the cage match with Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher, they both bled, and then Mark Davis did a run in and he ended up bleeding. So I do think blood can be overdone in AEW. I'm trying to think. I don't think Jon Moxley bled, which is I didn't get my parlay in because I thought he definitely would play.
Sure.
But and if you've read the criticisms of the show, the main event was the weakest match on the show. And I think if the main event had gone on in the middle and they ended with Tony and Mariah, no one would have complained. I think it probably would have been thought higher of the show. So, but yeah, I mean, overall, it was a good show. I got to see my good buddy Paul Walter Hauser. He was there and watched Leslie Jones.
Oh yeah,
freak out over the her business versus the Outrunners match. I need to go back and watch the replay or watch the broadcast just so I can hear what they were saying and see how much they show her. But I think that's the interesting aspect too. And you and I are both anti-tribalism, even though we have our preferences.
Mm-hmm.
But like this show, you had Leslie Jones there. You had, like I said, Paul Walter Hauser, Ken Jeong, Senor Chang from Community, and host or judge on The Masked Singer, your favorite show of all time. But they're like into the show, and when they get shown on television, like they're reacting. Whereas when you look at a WWE show, especially now on Netflix, because they seem to do all the Netflix cross promotion with stars. And they'll cut to people in the crowd, and they're just kind of like, "Oh, hey, how's it going? I'm here at this show." Granted, it's not during a match, so it's a different time. But it just seems like the celebrities that are at AEW are really into the product, and so that was interesting. And then, of course, you had the cast of Queen of the Ring was there. Two of the female actresses from that movie about Mildred Burke that just came out recently. And when they asked one of the actors what she learned doing the movie, and she said, "Oh, I learned that wrestlers, you're going to win."
Yeah,
and everybody just kind of groaned, and they did. She came out and clarified, and a couple, I don't know if it was Tony or a couple of the others wrestlers that also AEW wrestlers that worked on the show, like kind of came out and clarified what she was trying to say is that because she'd been saying it in interviews prior to the release of the film, is that it's not breaking kayfabe and like, oh, you're going to win this match. It's more like an instinctual thing when you're trying to become a wrestler, is that you have that drive and you're going to succeed. And it came out poorly, unfortunately. But
wow, I'm surprised you're not rotating around the way you're spinning the story here.
Again, you can read her responses prior to that night where she says the same thing. But the interesting aspect that I found is that the director of that movie, his dad directed Rocky and the Karate Kid.
Really?
Yeah, which I don't know if that means anything about how good or not Queen of the Ring is, but
I do want to see it, and I would like to do a movie mania on it, but probably at this point it'll have to wait for streaming, I'm guessing. I don't know if it's still in theaters or not. So
I don't think so. I think they said they only had like a week run. And based on the
EEK or EAK?
I was going to say, based on the box office, it may have been a EAK.
Yeah. I think, and we'll talk more about it once we see it, but I think, because I listened to all the Conrad podcasts. JR, of course, was one of the executive producers for the movie. So, there was a lot of promotion for it, and Conrad kept saying, if we don't go see this and support it, we're not going to get more wrestling movies like this. And I don't know with this generation that the Mildred Burke story was the one to kind of put the chips in and go for in this regard. Iron Claw, I think even we grew up in the 80s during that era, and I'm not sure. I don't know if it was deemed a box office success or not, but I'm thinking a more modern day story would probably get more people, even the non-wrestling fan, to watch it. I'll be curious to see if it does, because I think the Von Erich story was separated enough from the wrestling that even a non-wrestling fan could get into it. But I'd be curious to see what the Mildred Burke, what Queen of the Ring really looks like. So,
yeah, and I mean, even I'm just looking up now, but Fighting with My Family, the movie that was about Paige and had The Rock behind it and had Vince Vaughn in them, and it only made just under 23 million.
Oh wow,
domestic. Let's see, and Iron Claw did 35 million. But yeah, I don't think, maybe if we got the Chris Hemsworth Hogan biopic, or if we got a Macho Man Randy Savage biopic, if you go with a big star,
Yeah.
you might draw people in. But
yeah,
I mean, I've said it on this show many times. Wrestling doesn't draw. It has to be something bigger. The storylines, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but yeah. So yeah, I don't. When they announced this Queen of the Ring, I didn't expect it to be a huge box office phenomenon. It's not going to upset Avatar.
right.
I don't think it'll be. We'll be hearing about it during Oscar season next year.
Yeah.
But,
well, and you talked about stories, and we're going to get more into that. We've got a series of WrestleMania podcasts planned out, and next week we're going to be talking about the cost of WrestleMania. If you are going to this year's WrestleMania, we want to hear from you and know. We're breaking down some of the cost of going to this year's event compared to when we went almost 20 years ago now, which blows my mind that it's been almost 20 years since that first trip. Can you believe that?
No, we are old, and
we are.
that makes me sad every day. But yeah, I'm curious. Once we start breaking down the cost, because they seem to be adding more and more stuff every day. They just added 4 nights of partying, after hours partying, Hall of Fame tickets. I don't know if you looked at those. They're doing it, as a separate event now, which again I enjoy, but it's back in a smaller theater, and they're actually putting seats on sale down on the floor. Like I'm guessing the wrestlers and families will be in the center section, and then they're selling the side sections to fans for $1,000 a piece. So,
man, we're gonna break it all down next week and talk more about it, and not just be a couple of old guys yelling at clouds, but really looking at it from a family's perspective and then from a fan's perspective, just see because surprisingly, when we would go back in the day, there were a lot of families there, fathers and sons, even moms and other daughters and everything. So it'll be interesting to kind of break it down and take a closer look at those numbers. But anything else going on in your world before we transition into this week's topic?
I will say I'm really tired as we record this. I just finished a 4-day whirlwind, what I call the All-American road trip through Texas. 2 baseball games, 5 museums, 3 presidential, a video game museum, and a toy museum. And so I got back into town about 12:30 this morning. And so if I don't make any sense during this conversation, I mean, that's normal, but I'm excuse this time.
People won't know what's going on.
Yeah, when I picked Jerry Lawler versus Michael Cole as one of the best matches of WrestleMania, you'll know that.
We'll know what's up. I do want to give a shout out to Greg Mahochko and Mike Luther. They are the hosts of the now retired Nerds United podcast. They did their 400th episode over the weekend and put a bow on that podcast. So if you haven't already, check it out. I need to actually practice what I preach and listen to that episode as well, but have not had a chance to listen to it yet. But Greg obviously gave me and you opportunities to host podcasts here on the Jittery Monkey Podcasting Network. So super appreciative to that. And I hope those guys, I'm not sure what is next, because like I said, I haven't listened to the show, but we'll see what's going on in the world of Nerds United, which sounds like you guys could have been guests on that show with your trip to the museums and all the stuff that you guys seen and did in Texas over the weekend.
I guess so. So if they're not united, are they untied now? Are the nerds untied?
I like that. We might steal that. Pick up the slack here and come up with another show. But yes, we are talking.
Yeah, if you want to follow in Conrad's steps, I mean, footprints. You've been slacking. You only have one show. You need to get like 28 more going.
That's true. That is true. We are talking WrestleMania, our Mount Rushmore of WrestleMania matches. And I just kind of threw some together. I didn't throw them together. These have always been the 4 matches that I've always kind of considered my Mount Rushmore. And Went back actually over the weekend and rewatched them just to refamiliarize myself, because two of them on my list we were actually in attendance for. And as weird as it is, we've been to 10 WrestleManias. I've never gone back and watched a full show of what we went to, but I'm pretty sure you've gone back and watched the ones we've been to, haven't you?
I've only done it when I've gone back and marathoned WrestleManias. Like, I don't go back, like after we get back from a trip or a few months later and go back and watch the show. It's always been part of a series of rewatches. So.
Gotcha.
And I will say my list is just a disclaimer at the beginning. I didn't want us to have the same matches, and I know there's probably like a list of about 10 matches that are some of those will always show up on a best of list. So I broke it down more by decade. So every 10 WrestleManias, I chose like the best match from the first 10.
I like that idea. That's a good idea. I appreciate that thought. So mine actually, you know what? Mine fall into that too.
Okay.
Actually, they do. Unplanned, but it does. So it'll be interesting to see. I think we may have one that's the same, but I don't think the other three, I think we're pretty distant on. So.
Yeah, you probably did not pick Jerry Lawler and Michael Cole.
I did not. I don't think announcers should wrestle, quite honestly.
I agree. You know.
If you know, exactly. So what do you have on your list for, and are yours in any particular order? Or are you going in order of the...
I'll go... Yeah, I'll just randomly throw it. So my first one, I'm going to go with the most recent from WrestleMania 37, and it's Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks.
Okay. That was I would definitely have put that in my honorable mention list. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that was the first women's match to main event when WrestleMania went to 2 nights.
2 nights,
that was 2 nights, because Becky and
Charlotte and
Ronda were in 2019, I think.
Somewhere around there, yeah. And that was my other. I was debating between the two, and I think, and again, I would probably have to go back and rewatch it just to verify. But I think Bianca and Sasha was a better match overall, and a more historic match if we want to get technical, like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and because Sasha's in AEW now, so I got to throw in some AEW.
Well, tracks. Of course.
Yeah.
I think that's. We've talked before about, even talking earlier about Toni Storm and Mariah May. Women's wrestling has evolved so much. You go back to WrestleMania, Wendy Richter and Leilani Kai.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would have been a blip on the radar as far as closing the show. And I think it's awesome that we've gotten to the point where, and even for this year's WrestleMania, and again, as we get closer to the event, because I still think there are things that are apt to change. I think that they could have almost closed night one out with the presumable triple threat match with Rhea Ripley, Io Sky, and Bianca Belair. I think very highly of Bianca and Rhea Ripley, and I think it's cool that you had her on your list. And like I said, she was a definite contender, or that match was a definite contender. I also liked the Charlotte and Rhea match from 39 when we were there. I did not put that on there though, but yeah, I think that's a good, solid, modern match to have. My closest modern WrestleMania match is from WrestleMania 30. It closed the show. It was Daniel Bryan against Randy Orton and Batista, and I know no Randy Orton match will make your list. I went though, you mentioned earlier story, and all 4 of my matches are based on story and how I felt, and this is one that we were there for, and so how I felt in that moment. And going back and watching it, I felt that, you get those goosebump moments when Bryan finally wins, Batista taps out, and the shot of little Connor in the crowd, who they named the Warrior Award after. And then, which I didn't know it. I Googled it. I have no recollection of a woman and a child coming into the ring with Daniel Bryan at the end of that match. That was his sister and niece. And apparently, and I read up on it, he was engaged to Brie Bella at the time. They were actually days away from getting married, and WWE told her that she couldn't go into the ring. So I don't know if they were. I think the Bellas may have been. I don't know if they were heels then, or if they were trying to do something to keep them all separated, because they're in that Divas championship match against, when it was AJ against 14 or 15 Divas, but it was just that feel good moment and the confetti coming down. And when they ring, because like I said, I went back and watched it. When they ring the bell when Batista submits, that crowd, it's a huge pop. And I was there yesing like everyone else, and it was just, again, it's that feeling you get. Unfortunately, though, Brian was so susceptible to the concussions and was kind of working injured even back then, that I feel like it was kind of like Chris Benoit's title reign when he won the championship finally, to an extent, what Cody Rhodes has kind of gone through. Like, there's this anticipation and build up to them winning the belt, and then once they do, it kind of doesn't feel like, I don't feel like the follow up after Brian's win was there, and he shortly vacated I don't remember. Did he vacate the title, or did he actually lose it?
I think he lost because he didn't.
Did he lose it to Brock, or did he lose it to John Cena? I can't remember.
I don't remember, because I don't think he stepped away until after 31, right?
Yeah.
Like, wasn't he in the Intercontinental ladder match at 31?
In the ladder match, yeah.
Yeah, so I think he retired shortly after that match. But I was just going to say, first off, do you have Braun Breaker at your house? Because I'm hearing a lot of barking in the background.
Yeah, that's the Rottweiler who's afraid of the storm that is coming here to Southern Illinois later today. So you may hear him throughout the recording here.
But anyway, no, that match was on my honorable mentions. It did cross my mind putting it on, but I couldn't remember, having not watched it recently, I couldn't remember how good it was. But I'm with you that it was the feel good moment. And unfortunately, I don't know if that, and I should say allegedly, because again, we don't know. We only can speculate on what we read online. Daniel Bryan was not supposed to be in that match.
Right.
But the fans turned. So did they put the title on him just to placate the fans and then try to get back to their original plans, soon thereafter? So I agree with you that I don't think the title reign was what it should have been. But again, it is, WWE is really good at creating moments, and even if they're planned and whatever, they still work for the most part. So, and this was one of them.
Yeah, and WrestleMania 30, as we've talked about before, was such a stacked show with it being the anniversary show. It's the year that the streak comes to an end. Cesaro wins that inaugural Andre the Giant Battle Royal. We see Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Hulk Hogan all in the ring together at the same time. It just was a show loaded with great moments and memories to me. And again, Daniel Bryan kind of being that non-traditional superstar compared to the ones that we just mentioned. To me, it felt special. It felt different, kind of like how, letting the women main event, they went that non-traditional route where the underdog, the true underdog, because I think WrestleManias 1 through 9, we knew Hulk Hogan was going to prevail or the babyface was going to prevail. But, by 30, there's sometimes that ambiguity that we're not 100% sure. So it was a great moment to be a part of. And I think that's part of the reason, too, why I picked it, because we were there for it and got to experience that. What else you got?
Let's see. What will I go? What's going to take the Teddy Roosevelt place on the Mount Rushmore? I'll go WrestleMania 17. This is one that there's been a rematch of sorts in the history of WrestleMania for this match, but this one I think was really the first moment where the streak. I'm trying to even remember if the streak was really a thing at this point or if it came into play with this match. But it's from WrestleMania 17, and it's Triple H and The Undertaker.
Okay,
where they, I think with this match especially, because when we get to WrestleManias 24, 25, 26, 27, where you have the Undertaker, Shawn Michaels 2 matches, and then the Undertaker Triple H Hell in a Cell match and follow up. Those became a little bit too meta in their match, whereas the 17 match is just 2 of the top stars going out and having a kind of a brawl all over the arena. And you thought, you talk about that ambiguity, again, the streak, I'm trying to remember when the streak actually came into to be a thing. I don't think it was actually until WrestleMania 18 when he took on Flair.
I think you're right.
So that's the other thing is like the match at 17 didn't have the hype of the streak. And so there was some ambiguity of could Triple H beat him? So yeah, I think
this would have been because he missed WrestleMania's 10 and 16. He didn't wrestle at. So this would have been his 9th WrestleMania appearance against Triple H. So it makes sense that they weren't necessarily leaned into the streak yet. But I think I've heard somebody say before that they mentioned something about the streak when he beats Flair the next year and it was 10-0.
Yeah, and I remember, if I remember correctly, that's when they kind of realized he hasn't lost at Mania, and that's when it became a thing. But again, I mean, those early matches, Superfly Snuka, Jake Roberts, Giant Gonzalez. I mean, luckily Giant Gonzalez got DQ'd,
right?
But yeah, those matches weren't exactly streak worthy,
right? Yeah, and what a legacy, and having that kind of distinction of the Undertaker being the man. They call Shawn Michaels Mr. WrestleMania, but really, I think the Undertaker has kind of earned that moniker with the streak that he had before. earned. Okay, I am going to just keep going by the decades, and I'm going to go with the era of WrestleMania 20s. And this is another one that we were in attendance for. It is the retirement match between Ric Flair and Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 24 in Orlando.
Who retired?
Ric Flair. Well, kind of. And even though, again, we were there, it was a special moment that the fandom, the fireworks, when Flair comes out, and like I said, I rewatched it. He comes out and he stands there and he's got that big, gorgeous blue robe and he holds it open and the fireworks start popping off and they take that wide shot. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. It was just one of those moments that you're like, yeah. You're just feeling it. And I think most of us knew or were pretty sure that Flair was going to lose that match and be forced to retire. He got inducted in the Hall of Fame, the night before, and just that whole weekend. And then of course we go to Raw the next night when they do the whole tribute. It was just an incredible weekend and one of my favorite WrestleMania memories and moments and matches. And again, like you said, WrestleMania is about creating those moments. And I think, there were some false finishes. You thought maybe he was going to pull it out, but then in the end he lost. And even though he didn't stay retired and he came back and did the TNA stint, I don't know. I still kind of view that as his last match because I don't think I saw any of his TNA work. Maybe I've seen clips online, but of course then in 2022 when he does the last match and does the tag team thing, I think some people probably would like to erase that memory as well. I mean, I think when it comes to send-offs in pro wrestling, that may have been the greatest send-off match WWE has done for a superstar, which, Hogan never got that. Savage never got that. Warrior never got that. So I think, it was special in that fact that they did such a send-off for him. So, it was just a very cool moment to be a part of.
Yeah, I agree. And, I was trying to think back through 24 because, again, that was another match that was on my short list. But
Well, that was the one I thought you would have had, so I guess we don't have any of the same ones.
We don't have it, no. Because, and I don't know, maybe I took more as a whole of WrestleMania 2 to be like, was it a good show in addition to that match, or was it just this one match that, because and spoiler, I don't have these matches on my card either, but the Shawn Michaels Undertaker matches, which were really good, but WrestleMania's 25 and 26, I do not, we attended both of those, and after each, I was like, okay, we're done. I'm not spending money coming back to WrestleMania next year, although we ended up doing it for other reasons. But those matches just kind of stand out in a sea. And then it's like, are they good because they're surrounded by mediocrity?
I also, though, I considered wrestlers that I like, and I this is going to come off sounding weird, but
so Ryback is not on your top two.
Ryback is not. I don't dislike the Undertaker, but I never got the whole thing with it. I thought it was cool in the beginning. It was different. It was something that stood out. And then, like we said earlier, to go that many WrestleManias undefeated, he's somebody that I don't dislike, but I don't necessarily, he's not on my top 10 list.
Yeah.
But obviously, like you said, the Shawn Michaels matches, the work he did with Triple H, Ric Flair, the Boneyard match with AJ Styles, he's had those great moments and matches. But to me, he's just one. So spoiler alert from me too. You'd be more likely to get him and Giant Gonzalez on my list. And so I don't have him listed either on mine.
Well, and I'll say that, going off of my pick for the match at 17 with him and Triple H, like when the streak became a thing, then to me that just kind of took away from the matches, actually, because again, there's no real suspense, and I feel like the matches that he had with Shawn and with Triple H later on were just very, for lack of a better term, indie-rific matches, where it's like the layout of the match was what you would see, and you see now in wrestling anyway, but it's like, the false finish, the kick out, the false finish, the kick out. And so that, to me, that kind of takes away from the match, because you're not that you're going through the motions, but it's like, if you're watching a romantic comedy, all the beats that they're going to hit. And that's those matches for me.
Yeah.
So
That's a good point.
So, my next match is actually one that we were there for, because I wanted to get one match from a Mania that we were in attendance for and going through. And this is another one that I think, talking about getting a moment, right now with WrestleMania 41, it looks like CM Punk will get his main event WrestleMania match that he's wanted. But I go all the way back almost 20 years ago to our first WrestleMania 22, and I go Edge and Mick Foley. And I think that really gave Mick Foley his WrestleMania moment.
I like that, yeah.
And I mean, whoever thought we'd see flaming tables in a WWE match?
Yeah, that was kind of that era of where they were getting a little more, I think, tying it in with, because ECW, I think, had they created...
Came back the next year.
Okay.
Or later that year.
Okay, yeah. That was a good pick. That I liked that one too. And like you said, Mick Foley got his moment. You mentioned Punk, and maybe we'll talk more about this as we get closer to Mania, because I'm still not convinced that is going to be the main event. But of all the CM Punk WrestleMania matches, I don't know that this one's the one that's main event worthy. I don't know. What do you think?
Say again.
So of all of Punk's previous WrestleMania matches, like I feel like this is more of a make good to Punk than it really being that event worthy match.
No, I agree with you. I don't even think the match is even as a match. I don't think the match makes sense in what I've seen so far in the storytelling. It's just like, oh, these three guys and they're top stars, and so we're going to put them together. I don't understand I get Seth Rollins doesn't like Reigns, and he doesn't like Punk coming back. Punk doesn't like Seth Rollins, but what's his beef with Roman Reigns? And what's Roman Reigns' beef with either of them? Because he's the top dog, or the OTC.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that match. I don't think this, again, talking story, to me, that story hasn't gelled. It seems more like, oh, we have these three guys and we know they can put on a good match together, and they have, history that we can play into, but there's nothing current in the storyline for them.
Yeah, the Paul Heyman factor is obviously going to be what plays it out, and we'll talk as we get closer again about that. But I like. I mean, no, because this was back when WrestleMania was one night, so I don't think him and the Undertaker would have closed the show. But and the year that he wrestled. Was he wasn't champ at any of the WrestleManias, was he? Or was he champ when he wrestled Jericho?
Yeah.
I don't
recall.
I can't remember either. Someone will correct us if we're wrong. But yeah, so my next one is one that is getting a lot of talk here lately because it is they're doing immortal moments now for the Hall of Fame, which is something else we'll talk about here. Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. It is the submission match. It's the probably the most infamous double turn match, and going back and rewatching that too. Obviously, now in hindsight, what's going to happen and what's coming. But Vince McMahon on commentary, setting those subtle clues. He's very anti Bret Hart, which of course Bret Hart previously had pushed him down on Raw and had gone on his tirade of cussing on USA, which was unheard of at that time. And really, kind of, I feel like this, going back and looking at it, it's all those little things that I don't know that there's a moment that said this is the Attitude Era, but definitely I think that whole thing with Bret Hart early on and the cussing and the attitude was the antithesis for the Attitude Era and got that kind of ball rolling. Austin did a great job, and really, if you look at that match, all three of the people involved, Austin, Bret Hart, and Ken Shamrock, who was the guest referee, who to wrestling fans or WWE fans, I maybe had heard the name before, but I didn't know necessarily a whole lot about him. But he gets the rub in that match too, and I think they all three come out of that bigger and better than they were going into it. And Bret Hart probably went on, in my opinion, his best run in WWE during that Hart Foundation, the summer of the Hart Foundation, if you will. So I just think on so many levels it worked. And again, that glass breaking, the Austin fighting at the end, bloodied up, and again, we talk about blood and used sparingly in situations like that. It works, and he just doesn't give up. He just passes out. That's again one of those goosebump moments where. And then I guess with the benefit of hindsight and knowing what is to still come, and it's sad in a way too, because Austin he may not be 100%, but that he is a hell of a lot better than he was 6 months later after SummerSlam. So it's such a great, to me, story and a time, because this was one of the lowest rated WrestleManias. I think WCW's Uncensored that year beat WrestleMania in buy rates. And that's, again, one of those golden nuggets that kind of stands out in a sea of turds from that year's WrestleMania. But it just, again, one of those memories and moments that I think helped turn things around. And I think, what do you think about WWE doing immortal moments now and inducting matches into the Hall of Fame?
I don't have an issue with it. I'm surprised it's taken this long to do so. I think it goes back what we discussed a few weeks ago, where they're kind of running out of top names to induct, into the Hall of Fame. So this is a way to get those top names back on the Hall of Fame show to sell it. Yeah,
right. Yeah, that's a great point.
And I mean, obviously, when I sat down and made my list the first time, this match was on there because it is one of the top Mania matches. And like I said, I think you explained it, but it did. I think without this match, Stone Cold wouldn't have been the guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and this may be a little cynical, and it may be me just being a little petty in today's environment, but this came after King of the Ring. So we already have Austin 316 as the catchphrase.
Yeah.
But this match showed Austin could hang in the ring.
Yeah.
And go. And, and again, this is going to be me being petty, but, this year's WrestleMania, we have the Yeet Meister, who is very popular with the catchphrase. Can Jey Uso deliver in the ring? I don't know. I'm not sold right now. And this match with Gunther is not, high on my list of matches that I'm anticipating at Mania. So maybe they should go back and figure out a way to redo Bret Austin with Jey and Gunther, and to make Jey the top guy. A guy that they can then push a few months later down the road. I don't know. That's just be well. Real quick, just going back to the CM Punk discussion, I did look it up. WrestleMania 28, Punk was the champion versus Jericho.
Okay.
But of course, they're not going to main event over The Rock and Cena, one time only, until we decide to do it again next year.
So that's what closed, because neither one of them was champion, right, in that match?
The Rock and Cena?
Yeah.
No, it was just the once in a lifetime. Read the fine print. Yeah.
Was that Orlando or was that Miami?
That's Miami.
Miami.
That's
okay.
Miami. Yeah.
Okay.
And then New York was Punk versus Undertaker.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. You were talking earlier when we were talking about the Daniel Bryan triple threat match, and that's not necessarily what WWE had planned. And I think historically, if we go back and look too, in 1997, Austin wins the Royal Rumble in that nefarious fashion, which is again one of my favorite Royal Rumble moments. But then the everything kind of the wheels come apart and everything goes to crap when Shawn loses his smile, and what all of that was planned, and what I don't know. And we end up with Undertaker and Sid in the main event, and but definitely Brett and Steve took because allegedly it was supposed to be Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart in a rematch, which I wonder if that would have happened. I think Bret would have won the title back, but where would that have left Stone Cold? Who does he wrestle then at WrestleMania, and does this all work? And it was cool seeing the crowd reaction, and the fans were getting behind him. And then Bret Hart, very snarkily leaves the ring. He's flipping fans off. They're flipping him off. And it just, again, worked so well. And I'm glad we ended up with that. No offense to Shawn Michaels. I'm glad he wasn't a part of that year's WrestleMania, because I think that despite, I think he thought maybe he was the man and they couldn't succeed without him. And even though the buy rate was low that year, it ended up setting the wheels in motion. The next year, by 98, it's, WrestleMania becomes again that pop culture phenomenon, and then 2 years later it's through the roof with the fans. So I think it all worked out for the best.
Yeah, and it's just that one butterfly flaps its wings and changes history moment, because again, you go back a year prior, Austin wasn't even supposed to win King of the Ring.
Right.
It was supposed to be Triple H. They do the curtain call in Madison Square Garden. The only person that can be punished is Triple H. So he doesn't get to win King of the Ring. And just because Austin winning, but if he's not facing Jake Roberts, who's on, this kind of religious born again kick, Austin doesn't just coin Austin 316 out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like it's just that perfect storm of things happening and working out for the best. If Austin 316 doesn't happen, where are we now in today's wrestling with who's on top?
Right. And, we're recording this at the end of March, and March 16th, it was 316 day. There were
Yeah.
people posting videos and talking about Stone Cold Steve. And it was all because of that. So it is so interesting to think about.
Yeah. And side note, I was just in Texas over the last few days, and we were driving yesterday up to Austin. And if I hadn't been driving, I would have tried to Snapchat you a picture, but you'd see the mileage sign and be like, Austin 42. So I was like, Austin 42 says 2 more miles to the last gas station. Get gas now. And it's like, yeah. But anyway.
That's cool.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to move on to my top pick, which I have a feeling I know what your number one's going to be if you go the obvious route. So I did not go in that route.
Okay.
But from the first decade of WrestleMania, or actually, I guess decade plus one, technically, from WrestleMania 10, it's Owen Hart versus Bret Hart.
Okay.
Probably the best brother versus brother match at WrestleMania. If you don't consider Kane and Undertaker to be brothers.
No, I think that's a fair statement, because we've had the Hardys, we've had Bret and Owen,
the Usos.
The Usos. Want to forget about that one? No, I think that's a definite good one, and a great opener. Probably one of the best openers for a WrestleMania.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Probably the best opening match, and again, the storyline going into why it was happening is part of the charm of the match. But yeah. I mean, Bret and Owen, two probably the best wrestlers, and sadly, Owen never got to live up to the potential that he had. So would Owen have been a world champion at some point, or do you think? Do you think he would always been in Bret's shadow just because of the way? Would he have always been the Marty to Bret Shawn?
I think that because
would Bret have gone? Would they have? Well, I mean, I guess they sent Bret over to WCW before the accident, but yeah, I don't know.
I think that had Owen lived, if you go the trajectory that happened on the other side, where Bret gets injured and retires in like 2000 or 2001, whenever that was, I think in the era where we're getting Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and those guys as champs, I think you could slide Owen Hart into that championship conversation at that point, and maybe it's a quick run. But I think that he could have, had he stayed active and stayed healthy and continued on, because I think that I was mildly surprised that he didn't win it when he was feuding with Bret. I would have almost rather seen him beat Bret than Bob Backlund at Survivor Series. And I know Bob was literally a transitional champion to get the belt onto Diesel. I could have seen them doing that same thing with Owen, but then I think that would have been a disservice to Owen ultimately too, if they would have only had him champion for 3 or 4 days like they did with Bob Backlund. But I think he would have eventually gotten the gold as Vince's perception seemingly changed through the years, and Owen would have still been a young enough man in 03, 04 to have been had maybe even a quick run as champion, especially after they split it off and we got two belts, 2 champions from SmackDown and Raw. So I think it could have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I would have hoped so, because I think Owen's definitely deserving of the title, which is a whole nother discussion that we're going to have in our WrestleMania discussions, as people being deserving of being on the WrestleMania card. But again, we'll save that for future Mania conversations. But yeah, I just think Owen, Bret, great opening match, like we said, and kind of set the mood for the night. And then, it leads into their steel cage rematch at SummerSlam. And, I don't know. It's just sad sitting here going like, oh man, what could have been? But again, the wheels of motion of, where would things be now if things were different then?
Yeah. Well, and like you said, the SummerSlam match, and then it kind of weaves back into like what I mentioned of that
Hart
'97 with the Hart Foundation, reigniting and all that. So it definitely a great match for sure. My pick, I've talked about this match forever. Comes from WrestleMania 7. Again, it's another retirement match. It's the Ultimate Warrior. What do you think I was going to pick?
I figured you go Steamboat.
Oh,
Savage.
Savage.
I mean, that's probably the best WrestleMania match. But again, trying to be different, not going with the usual.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought you might go with SD Jones versus King Kong Bundy.
But yeah, Hulk Hogan, the Macho King Randy Savage versus the Ultimate Warrior. It's the retirement match. Again, it's that story. Although looking back and watching it last night, I said to myself, months or 9 months later, Jack Tunney is going to weigh in and strip Hulk Hogan of the championship because of the Undertaker and Ric Flair, Ric Flair interfering in that Undertaker match. If you go back to the Royal Rumble, the Macho King attacks the Warrior and sets him up for Sergeant Slaughter to win the belt, and again, if you go by wrestling logic, Savage wanted the title shot against the Warrior, so why would he help the Warrior in losing the belt? So, and again, that becomes one of those things, the butterfly effect as well, where I think we agree that 1990, when Warrior wins the belt, the run is not that great.
Yeah.
I think fans wanted to see a change, but that maybe wasn't the change they wanted. Hogan was always still there, kind of like the Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes thing that we talked about so many times before too. So it never felt real great for the Warrior. He's in 6-man tags with the Road Warriors against Demolition. There was never that. And then Sergeant Slaughter, to me, was past his prime in 91 and throw in the Iraq War thing. And then by the time we get to all that, the war is kind of winding down. I would have rather seen Rick Rude in that spot than Sergeant Slaughter, but he's gone by then. So it's all, again, it's all those what ifs that could have been, what could have been. Because I think Hogan and Slaughter in 85 would have been great. From a fan perspective, as little Hulkamaniacs and stuff, but by 91, it was something that I felt like probably up to that point the weakest. Maybe Bundy and Hogan in the cage was pretty weak too, but it was a weak main event in my opinion, and everybody knew Hogan was going to win. With the Warrior Savage, and it's interesting too because we see Savage lose, kind of takes the summer off, but then Warrior is the one that ends up leaving the company for a time after that. But bringing Elizabeth back into the fold. And I go back and remember watching this match. My buddy at the time in high school had, we've talked about this before, the big satellite dish in the backyard. And so I had gone over to his house that day to watch this. And so, watching it from that perspective and seeing it live, and I don't remember them talking about Elizabeth being there. I just remember her coming in at the end, but they show her at the introduction. Yeah, when Savage comes out on the sedan with Queen Sherry, it was just to me it was very well done, and the emotion, and again, it's that moment, it's that memory. It's not necessarily the match, because obviously this probably was the Warrior's best match, but he's not going to get any 5-star match accolades by any means, but it's one of the first times that I remember the false finish. Savage goes up multiple times and drops the elbow. There's been criticism here lately that the Warrior's finish was disrespectful when he just stood on Savage and got the pin. I think Savage knew, it was all part of the plan. It established that dominance, and then the winner is whisked away and leaves, and really the story then comes after that with Savage and Elizabeth reuniting. And unfortunately for them, this was near the end of their marriage, and ironically on TV it's the beginning of their relationship, or married life at least. But anyway, I picked that as one of my final Mount Rushmore. And again, mine weren't necessarily in order of favorites, but definitely one of those that I go back and remember very fondly.
Yeah, and like I said, the whole big issue here is if the Gulf War wasn't happening, like I said, who would we have lost the title to? And would that have affected the WrestleMania 7 plans? Because also, I don't think, obviously, Savage didn't want to retire because he comes out of retirement and then he goes to, WCW a few years later because apparently Vince didn't want him to use him as wrestling.
Yeah.
Which is very odd to think of, at the time he was too old, and now you look at the age of wrestlers, which, again, better health regimens, better, less destructive habits.
Yeah.
Let's say. But I think again, it worked out for not Hogan, but for Savage and Warrior to have that match that had the story, have the story, the better story than turncoat soldier versus all American.
Yeah,
and I think I don't know if that, if we're on the cusp of the turning tide of the ultra patriotic character being like, in the 80s, that was cool and great. And now it's like, okay, we're beyond that. We want something more. We want a Savage, who isn't, what am I trying to say? He's, we want someone more, I guess, realistic or more identifiable than just than a cartoon character. So even though Savage pretty cartoonish, but
yeah. Well, could Savage Warrior as the championship match closed out that year's WrestleMania? I know with Hogan kind of looming around, he wins the Royal Rumble. He goes on, and this was before that was a stip, but he does go on to wrestle Sergeant Slaughter, because then it's like, well, what do you do with Sergeant Slaughter if that's the case? And then
he gets all programmed.
So yeah, it would have been an interesting dynamic to see if they would have stuck with the Warrior a little longer as champ. He goes on, and this is the era where the fans are leaving happy, so Warrior would presumably have retained against Savage at WrestleMania 7 if that were the championship match. But then, as we saw a year later, the main event that closed out the show was not the title match. It was Hogan versus Sid. So Hogan was still obviously the cash cow and the one that they were always going to go back to and rely on. So yeah,
unfortunately. And that's something we've discussed many times on the show here, is that you have your top star and you don't know how to not overexpose them or run them into the ground. And whether it be ego, whether it be risk of not avoidance, but just not wanting to take the risk of, well, what if we try somebody new and it doesn't work? It's so, because again, we saw it with Hogan, saw it with Stone Cold and The Rock, I've seen it with Roman Reigns for the last decade. But yeah, I think, and I guess it's one of the good things about wrestling now these days too, is there are more than one or two top guys that you can cycle into the main events. So
yeah.
Very
interesting. Well, Chad, next week the plan is to talk about the cost of WrestleMania again. If you are a fan that is planning to attend any of the WrestleMania activities, and I'll be interested to see too how WrestleCon ends up looking this year and how some of the other events, because WWE, for whatever reason, seems like they are, like you said, announcing a new event, a new show, a new program throughout the week of WrestleMania. And again, is that an effort to squeeze out the smaller indie shows? There's a ton of indie events going on too. So I'll be curious to see who the winners and losers are as we get out of WrestleMania week. I think AEW very wise to kind of sit this one out like they've done through previous years. So
yeah, and I don't think normally Ring of Honor has one of their major pay-per-views during WrestleMania week, but I think it's been pushed back to May this year. So, or later in April, like they're not going to be in Vegas. So
okay. All right, friends. Well, that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening and or watching, and we will see you next time.